Elevator Systems, Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, where we look at Bowen Family Systems Theory ideas and concepts in brief and understandable ways. Today, we are doing some elevator pitches on how Bowen theory is useful in dating. And our guest today is Joe Berger. Joe joins us from Burlington, Vermont, where he works as a therapist with individuals, couples, and families. Previously, he worked for several years in community mental health, predominantly at a residential program for women transitioning out of prison. He received a master's in social work from the University of Vermont and has completed 2 years of postgraduate training at the Bowen Center in Washington. And he is currently a faculty member at the Vermont Center for Family Studies. So welcome, Joe. Katie and I are so glad to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, you get to do the first pitch. Bowen theory in the dating world.
Oh boy.
What's helpful? Yeah.
So here's what I pulled together. A Bowen theory approach to dating emphasizes focusing on oneself rather than the other. This includes being clear about what one's trying to do in the first place by dating and having some guidelines for self throughout the process. Those guidelines or principles are important because many of us, when placed in activating interpersonal situations like dates, are vulnerable to doing or saying things to try to get more comfortable or prevent social tension. Those behaviors are not always consistent with our goals. Being open and authentic while dating requires clarity, as well as an ability to tolerate rejection and disapproval. So that's what I came up with.
I like it. Where were you 30 years ago when I was starting out? Very good. Katie, go ahead.
Bowen theory. There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to, I think we're going to say in the introduction of this season that I'm going to take a look at one of the concepts that I think really helps me think about dating from a Bowen theory standpoint, and then how I think about it with my clients. So I found over the last 10 years, I've sat with a lot of people on their dating journey. So one of the things I find useful as I sit with people when they're thinking about dating is the multi-generational process. Probably something most people don't think about when they're about to go find a partner. But two of the important aspects, I think, of the multi-generational process that I encourage people to think about is describing the relationships that they had in their growing up family. Were they close? Were they distant? Were they open to talk about things? Were they not willing to tolerate strong emotions? How did they handle conflict? Because I think this influences how you show up in both dating and finding a partner. And you might be sensitive to what you're looking for on those dates based on what happened in your growing up family. So I find it useful to think about that. The other part of that multi-generational process that I wanted to put into this discussion was the pressure in partnering. So just getting curious about your multi-generational process and how much pressure is in there to how much are people invested in you partnering, because that will show up in you and the anxiety that you have both in looking for a partner, how much you move towards people, how much maybe you're not encouraged, or there's some anxiety in the right partner or not finding a partner. And so maybe you back away from dating. So I think thinking about how your multi-generational system thinks about and how that process has worked in the past of partnering. I'm gonna stop there, but I could talk about the societal influence of this as well, because I think not just your multi-generational process, but society today has a lot to say about dating. So there's my long pitch as usual. Dixie, I will hand it to you.
Yeah. Mine, I think, goes quite well with what Joe had to say. Mine was, I think the idea of solid self and pseudo self is really useful to keep your eye on in dating. A question that we asked our kids when they got to sort of the liking stage in their teens was, do you like that person, or do you like being liked by that person? And of course, everyone likes being liked, but the question is, how much do you change yourself to be liked? And of course, there's some accommodation that goes in any relationship, especially partnered relationships. But how do you tell the difference between being flexible and adaptable versus like losing yourself and your values in big and small ways, essentially for the sake of being liked. Do you pretend in order to be liked? So that was mine. And then some from Dr. Bowen. In relationships with others, people are free to engage in goal-directed activity or to lose self in the intimacy of a close relationship. From the Murray Bowen Archives, a letter to a patient in 1966 asks the question, not referring to dating, but it applies here. How do you explain the differences in your perceptions? Are you seeing things that are not there, or is he wearing blinders? Either of you could offer solid evidence to validate separate views. From Kathleen Smith's Everything Isn't Terrible. Staying focused on being yourself when you're looking for a partner is one of the absolute hardest things to do. We are so quick to sacrifice ourselves for the pleasure of perfect strangers. And then the last one from Jenny Brown's Growing Yourself Up. The temptation to fill gaps in our maturity with a relationship can be a particular pitfall for the single young adult. Society, here we go, Katie. Society's obsessive focus on romance can inundate the insecure, changing world of the young adult. This can put pressure on people about being attractive to others that they compromise their development of guiding life principles. Many pitches, many ideas. What stands out? What seems useful in all of this?
I hear some themes. I mean, I don't know if Joe wants to jump in. I could jump in and say I noticed the theme in all of that was said was really making sure you keep yourself in dating and not just focus on the other, figuring out who that self is, and just watching how much of that self can you bring when you're in what is obvious. I mean, I think dating is going to be an anxious process at some level. You're meeting someone new, so there's novelty. So already our nervous systems are fired up. So how much of yourself can you bring to that?
Yeah, I think that it's not only the challenge of holding on to yourself like during the date itself and at that like one-on-one level, it's also knowing, kind of being aware of what the expectations members of your family have for you, societal expectations, your peer group. And I think bringing some awareness to what you're up against or what those expectations are of you might help a little bit in getting clear about what you actually want and are trying to do.
Yeah.
And we are thinking about relationships across the lifespan this season, so it would be interesting to think how that changes depending on your age of life, right? The pressure of dating when you're 16 versus 26 versus 46. Yeah. What is different? What is similar? Which are the pressures that are there and not? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How are you shaped by that's a great question, Dixie. How are you shaped by your previous relationship experience? Because I think, that is a factor here. I talked about it more broadly in thinking about, I think we can evaluate how we function in relationship by looking at the other relationships we're in. And once you begin to date at those different age ranges, you have a lot of different understanding of yourself in relationship.
Right.
Yeah, I've definitely heard people who are dating after a first marriage and divorce have a lot of insight about that first marriage as maybe being, I just got married because it's what my parents wanted me to do, or because I was getting old and it really wasn't, I knew it wasn't right, but I just wanted to feel normal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I liked your question you ask your kids, Dixie, that one of, do you like this person or do you just enjoy being liked? I think that's such a useful question for someone's brain. Because of course it feels nice to have people into us.
Yeah. And thinking when you started bringing up the family stuff, my brain immediately went to Fiddler on the Roof and the Matchmaker song and Yenta, the matchmaker, coming up. And so not just through our own lifespan, but also through times in history where the pressure to be married is way, way higher for all sorts of reasons. Man, so many things to think about.
I'm glad you said that, because the other thing I wanted to put into this dating topic today is I also think now there are a lot of different ways to think about relationship too. I mean, I think they probably were always there, different ways to think about relationship, but I think with the different ways of, do I want to be in a monogamous partnership? Do I want to be in a polyamorous partnership? And so I just think it affords people a little bit more to think about in what are my own values here? What are my own principles that I want to bring into relationship? And then be faced with being curious about what the person sitting across the table or the coffee shop from you is also thinking about that. Yeah. Lots to think.
Yeah, you can go through even just the 1900s in terms of the expectations on relationships, or getting married because you were pregnant, no, you can't get divorced, adding in same-sex relationships, and all of these transitions. And how does that happen? How do those changes happen for people?
Yeah. One of my takeaways was going to be, I've been interested in listening to some of Esther Perel's thinking around dating. And one of the things I thought that she was talking about that was useful through the lens of Bowen theory was this idea of how society, the modern world, has shifted with focusing on personal satisfaction in marriage, right? Like that's a relatively, or partnership, it's a relatively new concept to think about. I'm looking for someone to better myself and that I hope will better ourselves together, and how evaluative I think that can turn quickly into in the dating relationships. I talk to a lot of clients who say, I feel like I'm on a job interview when I go on a first date. I thought, in some ways, I suppose it is similar to that if you're assessing what's this person going to be able to bring to my life. Yeah.
Great.
What about examples, Joe? Did you have
a
few?
I think maybe a clinical example. Was consulting with a young man who's dating, and he sort of realized that he needed to first kind of work on himself, and he thought, this isn't going to work if I continue to not have a job and nap all day. So I need to start by getting a job and getting out of the house a little more. So he did that, and then he also tended to, the first date would be 24 hours long. He sort of would lose himself, and it would just be all in right away. He would be very comfortable and bonded with this person who he really didn't know. So he challenged himself to limit first dates to no more than 3 hours. And it helped that he had a job to go to the next day. And he thought he had a better chance of maybe meeting someone that he could have a different type of relationship with through that focus.
How interesting.
And the self-change was for himself, with the bonus of the finding a partner, or
I don't think finding a partner was the only motivation for getting a job. There are other things, he wanted. And there's a lot that in coaching, there's a lot that's talked about outside of what I just summarized as. Like, he also worked a lot on his relationship with his mother, because he was starting to see patterns between his parents' relationship and the types of relationships he was having with women. So I think he kind of worked at this, which I think is an advantage of Bowen theory. He was working at it from a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that, the connection to those other relationships. I think that was in I was thinking about just the people I've sat with over the years who get really bogged down in the question of, if I choose this person, will I regret it? That's the question I thought about kind of bringing to this, is that intensity of, what if I pick wrong? And so the pressure on kind of picking the right person, and what do we do if we don't pick the right person? I was thinking about just the questions of bringing of, how do you make such a decision around this? And I think there's going to be a theme, because I just think a lot of energy and advice on dating is to think about the kind of partner you want. I think there's a lot of that out there. I hear little things like, write a list of the qualities you want in a partner. And I take it a different way of really thinking about, how do you want to be in relationship? Like, bringing the project back to yourself. How do you want to be in relationship? I you mentioned Jenny Brown's book, that I appreciated her language around getting to know oneself. And so that's the part that I think about with clients. Instead of focusing on the qualities in that partner that you're looking for, and kind of doing almost like the job interview, right? Like checkbox. Okay, they're employed, check. I'm sexually attracted to them, check. And going down that list of thinking about how do you experience, how do you want to show up, and can you hold on to that in the face of another person? What relationships in your life now do you do well at that? And then what relationships in your life do you not do well at that in? And then, like Joe said, the complexity of go work with your mother or your friend or your boss or your sibling about how you can practice that in a different context, and then watch who produces that same thing that's sitting across the table from you. I obviously had a lot of dates where I was sitting across the table from people. That's what I'm picturing in my head.
Reliving
it. Yeah, so that's just I wanted to set that idea of that anxiety that can really get locked into what if I pick wrong, and it becomes so other focused. Dixie, what have you got?
Well, the quote that I'm going to read almost sounds like complete opposite of what you're saying, but I think it's the same process. I pulled out, Ron Richardson wrote Jane Austen's Guide to Good Relationships, which I love because Jane Austen looks at especially how, marriage relationships are influenced by the family and cultural expectations. So from Sense and Sensibility, Marianne Dashwood, who's the Kate Winslet character, if that helps people, she says, I could not be happy with a man whose taste did not in every point coincide with my own. And I'm like, that sounds pretty sure of knowing herself in a way, and how, I don't know, how does that work out for her?
My instant reactivity was like, how boring.
Right.
But to think, yeah, I detoured you to think about she's clear in what she wants in the other, though.
Yeah, that's true. Well, my other Jane Austen quote, which I've quoted in our Solid Pseudo-Self episode from Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy and Mr. Wickham, one has got all the goodness and the other all the appearance of it, which I think speaks to that kind of pretend that we can do for the sake of, getting close. I was going to say getting jiggy because I am that generation.
I was thinking about a question that came up to me while you guys were talking, which I'm going to throw back to you. I could answer it myself. I'm going to throw it back to you. Is how do you move into, I think we're talking about dating. So dating starts, like I said, about maybe meeting in the coffee shop or going on a walk together. But how do you begin to think with people or for yourself about how you do know the person or know yourself in this relationship? What are some suggestions you might give to clients that you're sitting with? Put you on the spot.
Well, my other example was going to be, which is funny because I've never made one because it did not exist in my dating years, but the online dating profile. So actually, I think I just stole this from Kathleen Smith. What beliefs, interests, values, or traits do you put there?
Yeah.
What do you not put there? We want to put our best foot forward. Back in the day, this isn't about dating, but my son would say, Mom, when you put on your makeup and your lipstick, I know that I'm going to get in trouble, or I know you're going to be really grumpy. And I'm like, what else do we put on when we put on our lipstick for other people? And how is that different than, I don't know, who we really are? I don't know if that's the right phrase, but how do you show up as yourself and curious?
So getting out there, getting into, I think that one of the advice I give clients is to get into real life situations with people and try and watch how much time you spend on the device. I held up my hand, which doesn't help the people that are listening, but on your device, getting to know someone and just seeing what it's like to be in real space with people, right? I mean, even this, we're talking in very different corners of North America, and to think about how would we all sit differently in a space in person versus a space in the virtual world.
Well, I like, Joe, in your pitch, you, I forget what phrase you used about sort of the emotional tone or feel of dating situations. I forget what phrase you used, but it does make it challenging to show up authentically, I guess, just because of the newness or the pressures.
Yeah. You know, with, I think I used the word like activating. It's really hard
Right.
to kind of show up as yourself, but it seems to be a really important piece of this. Katie got me thinking about how maybe that is the best you can do to increase the likelihood that you'll be with someone who is a good match. If you're showing up as you really are, it's more likely that someone that's gonna match well with you will respond to that. And the second thing that came to mind when you were speaking, Dixie, was there's a quote, I don't know if it's from Dr. Bowen, but about how differentiation of self or being a self is attractive.
Yeah.
And so that effort to kind of please the other, you know, may not be actually attractive or may not actually work with someone who could be a dynamic person to get closer with.
What a great experiment. I mean, I think I sit a lot with clients, and I think dating offers so many opportunities, play around and experiment. And so, Joe, that would be such a great experiment to say, what if you take date 1 and you try this, and you take date 2 and you try this, and just experience what it's like to go in pretty focused on the other, or to go in pretty focused on yourself. I mean, it'd be useful, I think, to the person to just observe what that experience is like. How hard was it? You know, what did they learn?
Could probably save a lot of time too if you put what you really are looking for and what you really think out there. You're brave enough to do it on the first date.
Yeah, man, it's so true. I mean, that is a useful thing to say in this, is the amount of energy. I do think dating, if you're working at it, does take a good amount of energy for a person.
And going back to, where is that energy pointed? Is it pointing to find that person that checks all the boxes, or is it going to, knowing yourself and how you show up?
I thought of bringing some other just fun ways of thinking, is I do think that there's a lot of nice ways of media that you can just watch TV and just get interested in learning about the way people go about dating. My child is having us rewatch Glee, which is, you know, high school students. I guess we're in a season where some of them have graduated, but high school students really going at the challenge of deciding who they are and who they want to be and how they date other people and how they're bouncing around between persons and quite often. And then, you know, I've my little secret pleasure show is the Sex and the City reboot, to watch women at, you know, the other end of the spectrum who are thinking about dating and relationships and how they manage that, and how at that phase in your life things are quite different, and yet there probably are some similar things. So people to just get curious about how they think about relationship and dating as they watch things or read things.
Has anyone done a paper on Bowen theory and The Bachelor? Or
I imagine someone's thought a lot about it. Is that efficiency or?
Yeah. What makes a fast connection that lasts?
That one down my brain, going in lots of different directions that I will not put into here.
I don't know. Should we go to takeaways? And why don't I begin?
There you go. Dixie, please tell us your takeaway.
I really, really love the chapter on dating in Kathleen Smith's Everything Isn't Terrible. I may have occasionally illegally sent a picture of a page or two to a client.
All right,
My
Kathleen,
apologies.
you heard it. You know where to get her.
Just a page. But she talks about redefining success, that what we would typically see as a bad date is not failure if we show up as ourselves. You know, the idea is we tend to connect or partner up with someone at an equal level of maturity, and we're going to meet people at all levels of maturity. So if it doesn't work out, it makes sense that dates won't end successfully. And so maybe we don't need to feel rejected about that. Maybe we can look at that more objectively. And then just defining successful dating as sticking with your principles. It's a really, really good chapter. Good questions.
Joe, what do you think? What are your takeaways you're throwing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think if someone can tolerate disapproval or tolerate turning someone down, I think that gives them an advantage as they're dating. And my takeaway was this was so interesting to think about leading up to today. I want to ask some of my older relatives about what their dating experience was like, how they met their spouse, did they date people before they got married, and just learn a little bit more about what that was like for them, years ago.
Yeah. I had a client one time do that investigation who was having a real hard time with commitment. I think we should have said Avril Nadigam's book on commitment is really useful to think through too as well.
Yeah.
And was so interested at had a parent and I think a grandparent that were sort of, I don't want to say forced, but like their choice was strongly encouraged by other people to make that match. And just how finding that out just shifted things in this person's thinking about their lack of looseness in this process. So sort of like the resistance that they were having to getting married, and just to think about how that would sit in that multi-generational process. And she didn't know that story, right? Like she didn't know that story. And so without knowing that story, she was still experiencing the resistance, but didn't have any context to it. I think in a previous episode, Carrie Collier talked about that. Not knowing those stories creates different explanations we're throwing in, when actually it is this multi-generational process that's showing up in the here and now. Yeah. I thought that reminded me of that, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah. The benefit of not just knowing the story, but also having open conversations.
There you go.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being able to talk to people about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Katie, did you already give us your takeaway?
I think I've said probably 100 takeaways already in this thing that I do think I was interested in the thinking that Esther Perel. So if people want to think about that one, I think Avram has done a lot of thinking about committing in relationships. So his book would be another resource for people. But I'm going to go back and ask Joe one more question, because Dixie answered my question on things that you say to clients when they're going through this dating process. I wondered if you had any other thinking you want to throw in there as people are kind of making their way in this phase of their life.
Yeah. I mean, I think I just try to ask questions that help them focus on self, get clearer about what it is they want. So I think people come in and they're really focused on some of the pressures that they're experiencing, or, trying to figure out what do people normally, how fast do people normally respond on a dating app, rather than how fast do I want to respond to this person. So I think things like that, and focusing more on, what one wants and what one needs, rather than sort of, I hear a lot about love languages, this person's the wrong love language.
Yeah, that's useful. I was thinking about one thing we really haven't talked a lot about here is I encourage my clients to remember this is supposed to be fun, dating, getting to know someone, these early journeys. I think there can be a heaviness to that decision making, but hopefully there's always also fun. I mean, this is exciting and interesting to stick to the curiosity and the novelty of getting to know someone and getting to know yourself in the face of a new person. I mean, that's great research for you. How do you show up differently with different people? I think hopefully that can be a fun and a not a heavy exercise. So that's my other parting thought. Have fun.
I feel this is the part where I should admit that when who is now my husband, the first few months that we were dating, we had dated for 2 months and then he left to go tree planting for the summer. And it was the late 90s. So we were like writing letters. There was no like cell phones. Like it was another time. And I went home and my mom owned a bookstore. So I like stole like, look at all these illegal things I'm doing with books. Anyways, I got like 5 books and did diligent research to figure out, do I love this boy?
Wow.
And I read all the books to try to like, do I love him? And I decided yes. So our first set of letters are I love yous crossed in the mail, but he didn't need to read 5 books. He just kind of, and so, man, we don't need to get into that, but a lot of unsureness in myself. And what is the balance of knowing and sort of trusting myself versus going to an expert?
It's interesting. My now husband is, we started with letter writing too, because we lived in different time zones. And it's interesting to think about what is the difference. I'm just looking at that connection. What is the difference between getting something on a piece of writing something down and sitting with it and then sending it versus kind of that quick responding on the app or responding with text message,
right?
Yeah, immediate, And I don't think either one's good or bad. I just think that's another thing that I would be putting into people's brains with that curiosity. What's the difference of, I think you said it, Joe, like instead of looking at the national average of how long it takes people to respond on the app, is what do I want to, how much energy do I want to put into this a week? When will I choose to respond to someone? Yeah.
And we do a lot of evaluating of how long they are taking.
Yes, we do.
Good. Well, we did it. There we go. I will put up a whole bunch of links in the show notes to some of these concepts, to some of the books that we mentioned. But I want to thank you for joining us today, Joe. It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I'll remind people that we have season 1 and 2. I'll put up some links where you can go into more detail on the concepts we've been talking about. And most of all, I hope these ideas get you curious as you swipe right or left. Do you swipe left? Is that a thing? Anyways, and as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.